Hi, welcome to another interview in our series, The Hard Facts About Soft Skills. I'm Linda Katz Wilner of Successfully Speaking, and today I will be interviewing Howard Kurman of Offit Kurman Law Firm. Welcome, Howard. It's a pleasure to meet you and speak with you today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's start with first a little bit about you. I know you're an attorney.
I
know
am.
you're an employment attorney, but tell us a little bit about you and Offit Kurman.
Sure. So first about Offit Kurman. I'm a principal and one of the managing partners of Offit Kurman. We have about 200 attorneys, and we're located, actually we just affiliated with a group of attorneys in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we have offices now from North Carolina up through Manhattan. Professionally, I've been a management, labor, and employment attorney my whole career, and that spans many decades. We won't go into the number of years.
We don't have to talk about that.
That's right.
Well, what I noticed when I went to your website, the first thing that stood out were some 3 features on the homepage. One was trust, one was knowledge, and then one was confidence. And it shouted out to me that you are certainly talking right away and differentiating hard skills and soft skills, because the knowledge that you have to have, of course, as an attorney, you have to have those hard skills, and that's your knowledge base. But you already recognize what's so important, and that's trust and confidence. And you even mentioned collaboration. So when I saw that, I said, well, that's exactly the soft skills, and I'd love to talk to you about that because you have so much experience in that.
It would be my pleasure.
How did you come up with those 3 areas to talk about?
Well, I think that in differentiating our corporate ethos or culture, we believe strongly that being a competent attorney is only one part of the profession, that there are many, many competent attorneys out there. But in addition to that, you know, what you would call the soft skills and what we would call kind of the other positive part of being an attorney is being able to instill confidence and trust, not only frankly in your clients, but in the other attorneys with whom you deal on an everyday basis, attorneys from other firms. So we thought that it accurately depicts our overall philosophy, both in dealing with our employees and the attorneys in the firm and our adversary attorneys in the profession.
So that's true. There are a lot of different levels of how you're working.
There are.
So as the managing principal, soft skills are important for you, I'm sure, as leading the firm, as well as the others. Tell us a little bit about what you think are the important soft skills you need to have.
Well, I think, you know, in any leadership position, people are looking to the leader or the person who's designated as a leader, not only for substantive knowledge and substantive leadership, but also for empathy and for skills that are interactive and that are comfortable for the employees, particularly today, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about it later, in the era of the Me Too movement, the attention paid to not only what the substance of a communication is, but how it's communicated. Very, very important. And so we have about 400 total employees in our firm, and we don't like turnover. We don't experience a lot of turnover, and I think one of the reasons for that is not only because of what we pay and the benefits that we provide, it's because we try very hard to be empathetic to employees and to establish collegial environments. And in order to do that, you have to have soft skills. You have to be able to communicate effectively with all employees, not simply attorneys, but support staff and administrative people as well.
Well, you want the people who are here to like coming to work, especially I know attorneys work more than just 9 to 5.
Right.
So with all those hours, you want to know that people are hearing you and supporting you and are willing to understand what your particular needs are, which all come under the soft skills.
Well, they do, and we always say that the mission of any law firm is not simply making sure that it serves its clients well, but it needs to serve its employees well. Because if you don't, the employees, even the non-attorneys, are the ones that make the attorneys look good most of the time. And if they're unhappy or uncomfortable, it doesn't redound well for the attorneys. So we do stress that on a consistent basis.
And even when somebody walks into an office, and I had a positive experience here today.
Oh, good.
But the first person you meet is the front of your organization, and if they're not friendly, or if they don't pay attention to you as you walk in the door, that's setting the whole mood from my experience here.
You're right, and we have a number of offices, and obviously we have a receptionist in each office, and we make it clear to them that they're often the first point of contact for somebody coming in, whether it's a vendor, a visitor, a client, an adversary. So that one of the things that we look for when we hire a receptionist is to make sure that there's somebody that will instill comfort and be courteous to anybody who walks through that door, because they are the representative for a period of time of the firm, and somebody is going to notice that. And if it's a bad experience, it doesn't bode well for anybody in the firm.
Right. And somebody has to be authentic. I always remember somebody saying to me, I'm at the front desk and I'm told to smile all the time, but if somebody comes up to me and they're very upset, should I still smile? And I said, absolutely not.
Right.
So we need to be authentic and not just have that plastered smile and greeting, but we have to have some sensitivities.
We would like to think that everybody in the firm is authentic.
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't happen, but that really is, again, a philosophy that we would hope to project to the community at large.
And what you're saying holds true, I think, for every organization. Right? We all have to have these soft skills so that people come in and they feel like they want to come back, or that person's understanding of them. But what I think about a lot with employment law is you get an opportunity to see all the things that may go wrong, and many of them are probably related to soft skills.
Sure.
I could think of several in my mind. So tell me a little bit about what your experience is. You said you've been doing employment law your whole career.
Many years, yeah.
So you have lots of stories. We
I
can't
do.
go through all of them.
I understand that. And, I will say just anecdotally that many companies that do establish a positive culture, and with that, of course, you have to have good communication skills. Many of them are not the companies that face typical litigious situations. It's not unheard of, but it's not typical. The companies that I represent that often have problems, and I won't name them, are often companies where leadership is lacking, or where it's perceived to be impersonal, or overly aggressive, or not empathetic. And those, and again, in this Me Too era, where communications are sometimes exacerbated or projected as more severe than they were intended to be, can create problems, and then I get involved. And sometimes it's a little hard to sort of, put the genie back in the bottle, and that's part of what I do.
And I guess people have to tiptoe around the workplace. And you mentioned Me Too, so
Sure.
I was going to ask you that later,
Sure.
but let's talk about
Sure.
that now. People are becoming so sensitive on how men and women can communicate with each other, and I think it's two ways. One is verbally, what they're saying,
Right.
but the other one is physically, the physical space, the touch, and all of that.
Yeah. So there
Where do we go with that?
are two aspects to that, I think. One is, to a large extent, and I see it as an employment lawyer, I think there's been a hypersensitivity that's developed since the Me Too movement or the Me Too attention. I often think that things that would have passed by innocuously and without any attention now get the attention of employees and management alike because of the Me Too movement. On the other hand, verbal cues, verbal statements that may have passed muster many years ago no longer really pass muster. So, for a male to say to a female, you really look nice today, in a totally innocent way, in a complimentary way, sometimes are taken the wrong way today. And of course, the, unspoken language that may go with that is, a leering look by somebody when they say, oh, you really look nice today, is sometimes troublesome for employees. And in terms of physical cues, I think the age of comfortable hugging between supervisor and employee is taken on a different mantle today. And when I do training of workplaces, and I do frequent training now as an outgrowth of the Me Too movement, so I do training of both management and rank and file employees, I make it a point of indicating that you really do need a certain distance today, physically, between employees, whether it's co-employees or whether it's management and subordinate, because of the exacerbation of, what employees view as not complimentary and bothersome and bullying So I counsel on that, and I make sure that people understand that the boundaries that may have existed 10 years ago have changed dramatically. And that creates communication problems,
Sure.
and also creates sometimes a more formal atmosphere in a company than you would like. But that's just the nature of the business environment
That's the
today.
cost. I mean, so people may not be as warm to each
That's
other
exactly
because they're
right.
so worried about what they're going to
That's
say.
exactly right.
So you advise them on physical space.
Right.
What about compliments? What can they say?
Well,
What can they say? I mean, that's
I don't think that people need to be super sensitive about it, but I think a lot depends on, how you present a compliment. Again, there's a difference between saying to somebody, you look very nice today, or I like your dress, or I like your suit, etc., as opposed to, wow, that is some hot looking dress. So there are ways to communicate, and there are ways to communicate that really are not taken well in today's workplace or society. And one of the things that I concentrate on when I do training is to make sure that people understand that how you say things, and particularly in the era of social media, I find that email, while it's easy, can be dangerous as well, because there aren't a lot of people that will proofread, what they've said in an email or a text or a tweet or something on Facebook, which may have unintended consequences. And those are the things that get companies in trouble.
And you don't know who's forwarding it, who's reading it.
That's exactly
and
right.
Sometimes I even say to people, and I've learned from other people, maybe just say it, don't put it in writing, unless you want it in writing.
Or if you're going to put it in writing, maybe wait a few hours before you send it, or the next day, because I've seen on more than one occasion, again, as an employment lawyer, a lot of times I look at emails that may have been sent by a supervisor to a subordinate with no evil intent, but the way it's phrased, the way it's communicated to an outsider looking at it may not be so innocent. And so that's why I think people need to pay pretty close attention. And one of the problems is, the communication is instantaneous. So you email, it can be instantaneous, you Facebook, you text, and there's not much thought given to how will it be received on the other end.
It's often a knee-jerk response.
How will it be perceived by a third party looking at it 6 months later in the midst or context of a legal claim? So you got to be very careful about that.
And I'm guessing also, I've heard other things where, and again, a lot of my clients come to me for communication skills, and so it may come up, they're having issues with their boss or their manager, and how can they be more assertive, or how could they speak in a certain way? So I'm on the other end of that, helping some of the people in organizations or the leaders how they can speak better. Because everything I talk about is just what you're saying. I talk about the visual, the vocal, and the verbal, and you may say something, but it's how you say it, and it's how you look when you say it, and you already mentioned
I mean, it's
that.
very, very important. And, as a manager in our firm, one of the managers, I try and pay particular attention, even if it's an overall negative message, something that an employee has done or an attorney has done, which may not be the best practice, but I try and communicate it in a constructive way rather than a destructive way, because I just find that the latter really doesn't get you too far.
Do you recommend, if, let's say, there's a female employee meeting with her boss or meeting with her manager, having a third person in the room nowadays?
Well, it depends on the content of the message. If it's a particularly sensitive message, something that could be misperceived, misinterpreted, or if it's personal in nature, yes, I think it's a good idea to have a third person. The unfortunate part about that is it tells the other person right away that there's some significance that may not be intended by the communicator. But in today's day and age, I'm often asked that question by clients who are communicating some negative vibe or message to an employee, and my message usually is, yeah, I think it would be good to have a second management employee in there, so there's some corroboration of what was said, how it was said, what was responded, etc. Unfortunately, we've evolved into that.
Yeah, but you make a good point that if I walk in the room and I see there's another person sitting there, I start to say, what's
Why?
he going to say to me?
Sure.
And why is there a witness?
Absolutely.
But it happens in other professions. It happens in healthcare.
It does.
You'll often have, I know especially OBGYNs,
Yes.
they always have another person in the room
Yes.
just because they need, whether it's a male or female physician,
Right.
they always need somebody else in the room. because-
Absolutely. But it's unfortunate that it's evolved that way, but being a lawyer, I can tell you that sometimes it really does help to have that second person who can corroborate what was said and how it was said, as opposed to one-on-one, he said, she said, or et cetera.
And having worked a lot in healthcare, when people are under stress, it's no different, I'm sure, from legal situations.
Sure.
When you're under stress, you may misinterpret what somebody said. to you.
Absolutely.
And that becomes a problem. And who else was there if you weren't recording it
Yes.
or having some way to validate what was said in that situation?
Absolutely.
Here's a question I have for you. I do a lot of work with people who speak English as a second language.
Right.
And I know there were Supreme Court cases, I think in the 80s about this, about accent modification
Right.
or discrimination because of either language or accent. Have you done any work in that area?
Well, there are both federal and state statutes which would prohibit any kind of discrimination based on national origin, which is precisely really what you're talking about. So if somebody has an accent, a foreign accent, what the employment laws say is that you can't discriminate against that person merely because of an accent, which is an indicator of national origin. Okay, so many times I've been faced with the issue of interpretation or interpreters. Do you need an interpreter for a particular situation with someone who doesn't speak very good English? And that can be a thorny issue, both from the practical issue of cost and from the standpoint of delaying communication until you find somebody that can be an interpreter. But I think most sophisticated employers today are aware of the fact that merely because an employee or a prospective employee has an accent, no negative ramifications or interpretation should be made of that. So I'm sure in your line of business, it's a problem, but...
Well, the case I'm talking about, which was a long time ago, it was somebody who didn't get a job because of his accent, and somebody whose skills weren't as good
Yeah,
got the job, but the job required talking on the telephone.
yes.
And that was the caveat. They said, well, if you need it for your job, the person who speaks the best will get the job, and that wasn't discriminating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what the law is if there is a business necessity which is unconnected necessarily with the national origin of a person, so that if you're talking about, let's say, a salesperson or somebody who makes direct sales calls from the office, and the person, because of an accent, really is not easily comprehensible, then yes, you would say to the employer, you want somebody that is easily understood and comprehensible, and in that case, the law would say that you can certainly make a distinction between the person who can speak perfect English and the person who's difficult to understand.
Because it's interfering with their performance
Yes.
in a job.
On the other hand, if it's not interfering with performance, suppose you had somebody who's merely doing a clerical task, which doesn't involve communicating perfectly with another employee or vendor or person, then you have a problem as an employer in making that a distinction. So,
What about English only in the workplace?
well,
Has
English.
that changed? Because I thought you could not mandate that.
No, you
what are your
can
thoughts about
under
that?
certain circumstances where, again, it's business justified. But merely having a English-only rule where there's no legitimate business justification for it is troublesome. And yes, employers have gotten into trouble with that. But there are ways to establish that depending upon the legitimate business need that an employer would have for that. For instance, if it's a safety-sensitive position, and the employer would say, I need somebody who can obviously read and write and speak English, because not doing so would put someone else in jeopardy, safety. So it's a nuanced distinction, but one that is important in employment law.
I guess there are lots of nuances. Right?
Well, there are, of
Right.
course.
I'm thinking of even going to a hospital and you're in the elevator as a visitor and you see two people in staff speaking another language. Is it fair to say they shouldn't be speaking another
Well,
language?
if they're
I mean,
on,
where do you draw the
if they're
line?
on their own time and they're not performing hospital duties or their duties. I think it would be difficult to say to somebody in an elevator, hey, you have to speak English to this other person. I mean, why? What would be the business reason for it?
That's when it becomes problems. When
That's when it
somebody
becomes
feels in their
problematical.
company, that's what, or their hospital, that's
of
what
course.
they want.
Yeah.
Howard, you mentioned cell phone use.
Yes.
What are, because now I know I do some trainings where I say take out your phones because we use the phone for it, and they say, oh my goodness, nobody ever tells us to do that. Or can you make rules about that in the workplace?
About cell phone use?
About cell phone
sure.
use?
I mean, most employers today who have, employee handbooks are going to have provisions on the appropriate use of personal cell phones. Many of them would say that you can only use it in an emergency to make or receive phone calls. Obviously, you're not supposed to go on social media on your phone while you're working. So there are a myriad of rules which have evolved because virtually every employee today, no matter where and no matter what the level that the employee is in terms of earnings or position of responsibility, you're going to have a cell phone today. And virtually all employers that I deal with have policies that would limit or would list restrictions on the use of those personal cell phones in the workplace.
So I guess it comes down to just knowing what the rules are of that particular workplace. So it's incumbent on the person whose organization it is that they set that up in the guidelines, and then the employees have to follow, choose to follow it or not, and then that's
right. Employers have wide latitude in determining the conditions under which someone would be able to use a personal cell phone in the workplace, and for legitimate reasons. For legitimate reasons.
And what about dress? There are dress codes. Some organizations have dress codes. Do you know, are there any situations that you're aware of that there have been problems because of that?
Employers have wide latitude to establish dress and grooming standards. Sometimes recently where there's controversy is where you have grooming standards, but for instance, a minority employee might have dreadlocks or might, particularly African American men, may have shaving issues because they get skin conditions. So you get involved in those sort of nuances of normal dress and grooming standards. Sometimes it's a religious issue. If somebody has a bona fide religious belief in how they wear their hair or whatever. But I would say generally, employers, again, have wide discretion in determining dress and grooming standards for the workplace, particularly where there's a business justification. So if you're a bank, for instance, you're generally not going to want somebody behind a booth that's going to have visible tattoos up and down his or her arms or neck, or piercings, body piercings, et cetera, that are visible to the public. On the other hand, if you have somebody who's working in a warehouse and is not in the public eye, maybe there's less business justification for that.
So many details, right?
Sure.
And so many circumstances, and I just think there are more and more circumstances now that have come up.
There are.
Right, because
There's
you
no
started
question
talking
about
about the tattoos, the body piercings.
Yeah.
Those weren't issues 30 years ago,
They
30
were
or
not.
40 years ago.
No, they were not.
They weren't as mainstream.
No,
Maybe that's,
but today they are.
right. Did I miss anything about soft skills, about things that you see in organizations or issues
No,
that come
but I
up?
do think, just as sort of a concluding remark, I think that they're extremely important in whatever organization you're talking about, not simply a law firm. So that I think the most successful organizations are ones that create a positive culture, and positive culture generally, I think, is predicated upon good communication skills, and where management and highest management make it a point of understanding and being empathetic to whatever the workforce it is. I think those are the more successful workplaces. And that, by the way, I think if you read the Daily Record or the Business Journal, everybody now has, well, nominate your company for the best workplace. And I often think that, you know, the companies that are nominated or actually chosen are the ones where not only are they monetarily successful, but they've created positive work cultures for their employees. And of course, that's dependent upon the soft skills of its leaders.
Sure. And you mentioned communication skills, and I know you know this, but I always like to focus on the fact that with communication skills, it's not just your speaking, it's also, are you a good listener? And
Sure.
that's what you alluded to with the empathy, because you can't have empathy if you don't listen to what the person's saying to you.
Well, it's particularly important in my profession. Clients, when they come to you, often are in a position of stress. Not all the time, but a lot of times. And you have to be empathetic, and you have to give them a feeling of confidence and trust so that they can unburden themselves and let you know sometimes facts which may not be favorable to them. But you need to know the good and the bad, just as though a patient going to a doctor needs to be able to express what's actually going on with his or her body.
Right. And so that goes back to, you may have the hard skills, you may have the knowledge, you may have the law degree and the medical degree, but if you're sitting down writing notes and never looking at the person, you're not going to be the one that they're going to feel positively to. And in healthcare, I know that when communication breaks down, those are the ones that are more likely to have malpractice suits.
Absolutely.
It comes right down to communication.
Yeah, you need good bedside manner in anything.
Bedside or wherever, or just talk to the person, not to the wall. And again, with different cultures, that becomes an issue.
It does.
And so I have to help other cultures understand that the American culture says, look at the person when you speak to them and listen to them.
Well, there's probably no shortage of companies or whatever that you can work with to improve those skills, because not everybody's perfect. That's for sure.
And none of us are. So we can always
always
improve. We
absolutely.
may be good listeners when the client's on the other side of the desk, but we strive to do it all the time in our lives.
I agree.
So with that, I think you really summarized it already, but if you can tell me some hard facts about soft skills, what would that be?
Well, to me, the biggest hard fact is that soft skills are a necessary but not sufficient skill in any kind of communication. So you need competence, you need skill, because even if you have soft skills but not competence, that's not going to do it in any profession or business. So the hard fact is you need 100% competence and 100% soft skills in order to be successful in any business.
That was a great way to sum it up.
So
Howard, I thank you. This has been so informative for me and for everybody else who's watching this, and I really appreciate it. And thanks for joining us for the hard facts about soft skills.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Sure, my pleasure too.